Sometimes the person who changes your life is the one everyone else overlooks. If someone had told me a week ago that I would walk into the most exclusive charity gala in Boston on the arm of my brother's best friend, I would have laughed and gone back to finishing my design portfolio. My life was predictable, almost painfully ordinary. I was Ethan Carter, a 21-year-old senior studying graphic design, living in a small apartment just outside the city, surviving on freelance projects, too much coffee, and the hope that someday someone would notice my work. Adrian Brooks belonged to a completely different world. At 29, he had already built one of the fastest-growing media companies in New England. Every business magazine called him brilliant. Every networking event wanted him as the keynote speaker. To me, he had always been something much simpler. He was just Adrian, my older brother Liam's closest friend since high school. Growing up, Adrian had been the calm presence who occasionally showed up for backyard barbecues, birthday dinners, and Thanksgiving football games. While Liam was loud and impulsive, Adrian always carried himself with quiet confidence. He remembered people's names. He thanked my mom for every meal. He once spent 2 hours helping me build a model bridge for middle school when Liam gave up after 10 minutes. Then life moved on. Liam started his own construction business. Adrian became successful. I left for college. We rarely crossed paths anymore, except during holidays. That changed on a rainy Thursday afternoon. I had stopped by Liam's office to drop off a new logo concept I had designed for one of his clients. The conference room door was half open when I heard familiar voices. "She cancelled," Liam muttered. 3 hours before the gala? You've got to be kidding. Adrian let out a quiet sigh that somehow sounded more disappointed than angry. Her agency booked another event. She apologized, but that doesn't solve tonight. Take someone else. It's not that simple. Liam chuckled. Half the investors think you've finally settled down. Showing up alone starts conversations you don't need. I started backing away, not wanting to interrupt, when Liam spotted me. Ethan. Both men turned. Adrian's silver-gray eyes landed on mine for the first time in months. I smiled awkwardly. Sorry. I can come back later. Before I could leave, Liam snapped his fingers. Actually, Ethan could help us brainstorm. I laughed. Me? I know nothing about billionaire galas. Adrian studied me with an expression I couldn't quite read. It wasn't surprise. It wasn't hesitation either. It was almost as if he were quietly solving a puzzle no one else could see. The room fell strangely silent. Liam opened his mouth, probably about to suggest calling another friend, another colleague, another socialite who understood Adrian's world. Instead, Adrian stood, buttoned his navy suit jacket, and walked toward me with steady, measured steps. He stopped only a few feet away. Come with me tonight. I blinked. What? Be my boyfriend. My heart nearly stopped before he added, with the faintest hint of a smile, a fake one. Just for one evening. Liam stared at him in complete disbelief. Out of everyone you know. Adrian never looked away from me. I choose Ethan. I was certain I had misunderstood him. My eyes shifted toward Liam, hoping he would laugh and tell me Adrian was joking, but my brother looked just as stunned as I felt. He folded his arms across his chest and stared at his lifelong friend. You cannot be serious. Adrian remained perfectly calm. I am. Liam shook his head. You know, Ethan has never been to one of these events. That is exactly why he is the right person. I finally found my voice. I appreciate that you trust me, but I would only embarrass you. Adrian smiled, a small, reassuring smile that softened the sharp edges of his normally composed expression. You will not embarrass me. I only need someone genuine. The word lingered in the room. Genuine. It sounded strangely important coming from someone who spent every day surrounded by executives, investors, and public figures. Liam sighed dramatically before grabbing his truck keys. I am staying out of this. If Mom asks later, I know nothing. He walked past us, stopping long enough to pat my shoulder. Good luck, little brother. The office suddenly felt much quieter after he left. Adrian glanced at his watch. The gala starts at 7. We have less than 4 hours. 4 hours for what? To make sure you feel comfortable. Before I could protest again, he opened the passenger door of his black SUV. The drive through downtown Boston was filled with an unexpected ease. Adrian never pressured me into conversation, yet every question he asked made the nervous silence disappear. He wanted to know about my final semester, the freelance projects I had been taking, and whether I still carried a sketchbook everywhere. I laughed in surprise. You remember that? You used to draw during every family barbecue. I smiled at the memory. I thought nobody noticed. I noticed. Those 2 words settled somewhere deep inside me. 40 minutes later we stepped into an elegant tailor shop on Newbury Street. The staff greeted Adrian by name before leading us toward a private fitting room. Racks of perfectly tailored jackets and crisp dress shirts lined the walls beneath warm golden lights. Everything looked impossibly expensive. I instinctively checked the price tag on one charcoal suit before quietly placing it back. Adrian noticed immediately. Do not worry about the cost. I absolutely have to worry about the cost. You are not paying for it. I hesitated. Then I cannot accept it. He looked at me for a long moment before speaking gently. Consider it part of the agreement. Tonight you are helping me. Let me help you. I finally nodded, though it still felt unreal. A stylist handed me a midnight blue suit that fit almost perfectly after a few quick adjustments. When I stepped out of the fitting room, Adrian had already changed into a tailored black tuxedo. He looked up from adjusting his cuff links, and for the first time since we met that afternoon, he said nothing at all. His expression simply froze for a heartbeat before a quiet smile appeared. That color suits you, he said softly. I felt my face grow warm as the stylist clapped her hands with excitement. Standing side by side in the mirror, we looked less like strangers pretending for one evening and more like 2 people who somehow already belonged in the same picture. By the time the limousine stopped in front of the Harborview Grand Hotel, the last rays of sunlight had disappeared behind the Boston skyline, leaving the glass tower glowing with thousands of warm lights. My stomach tightened as attendants opened the doors and welcomed guests onto the deep navy carpet leading toward the ballroom. Luxury cars lined the entrance one after another, and elegantly dressed couples stepped out with effortless confidence. I suddenly became very aware that only a few hours earlier I had been sitting in a small design studio worrying about a class deadline. Adrian noticed my hesitation before I even reached for the door handle. Still time to change your mind, he said quietly. I looked at him, then toward the photographers waiting near the entrance. If I run now, I will probably trip over these shoes. A genuine laugh escaped him, brief but warm. Then let us avoid that outcome. As soon as we stepped outside, flashes from cameras illuminated the evening air. I instinctively slowed, but Adrian calmly offered his arm. Remember, he said softly, just stay beside me. I slipped my hand around his arm, hoping no one would notice how nervous I was. Instead of feeling awkward, I found unexpected reassurance in his steady pace. He never rushed ahead or pulled me forward. He simply matched every step I took. We entered the ballroom beneath towering crystal chandeliers that reflected countless points of light across polished marble floors. A jazz quartet played near the stage while servers moved gracefully through the crowd carrying sparkling water and elegant appetizers. Conversations filled the room with a pleasant hum that somehow felt both lively and intimidating. Before I could fully absorb the atmosphere, the first guests approached. Adrian, good to see you again. Congratulations on the new acquisition. And who is this? Every introduction sounded almost identical. Adrian answered each question with quiet confidence. "This is Ethan Carter." He paused just long enough for me to glance toward him. "My boyfriend." Hearing those words spoken aloud sent an unexpected warmth through my chest. It was only part of our agreement, yet the way he said them sounded effortless, almost natural. Every time someone greeted us, Adrian subtly included me in the conversation instead of allowing me to stand silently beside him. When investors asked about creative marketing trends, he mentioned my design background. When someone complimented my suit, he smiled and said he had excellent company for the evening. Little by little, my nervousness faded. I even caught myself laughing during conversations I never imagined I would enjoy. Across the ballroom, I noticed several curious glances drifting our way. Some guests whispered to one another before smiling knowingly. Others looked genuinely surprised. It became obvious that many people had expected Adrian to arrive alone. Instead, they watched us move together through the room with comfortable ease. During one conversation, an older woman smiled warmly before turning to me. "I have known Adrian for almost 10 years, she said. "I have never seen him look this relaxed at one of these events." I blinked in surprise before looking toward him. Adrian met my eyes for only a second, but something changed in his expression. The practiced smile he had worn for the cameras softened into something quieter, something almost impossible to describe. For the first time that evening, I realized we were no longer simply pretending for everyone else. Somehow, without either of us noticing exactly when it happened, we had stopped acting altogether. The ballroom grew even livelier as the charity auction approached, and the conversations became more relaxed. Adrian was pulled into a discussion with several board members near the stage, leaving me standing beside one of the tall windows overlooking Boston Harbor. The city lights shimmered across the water like scattered stars, and for the first time all evening I could breathe without worrying about saying the wrong thing. I reached for a glass of sparkling water when a cheerful voice interrupted my thoughts. "You must be Ethan." I turned to see a well-dressed young man about my age with sandy blonde hair and an easy smile. He extended his hand. "I am Noah Bennett. My family works with Adrian's company from time to time." I smiled politely and shook his hand. "Nice to meet you." Noah laughed softly. "You look a lot more comfortable than I expected." "Is it that obvious?" "Only because I looked exactly the same at my first gala." His honesty immediately put me at ease. We began talking about college, graphic design, photography, and our favorite coffee shops around Boston. Unlike many conversations that evening, this one felt wonderfully normal. Noah even recognized one of my digital illustrations that had recently appeared in a local art exhibition. "Wait," he said with genuine excitement. "You created the lighthouse poster with the watercolor sky, did not you?" I blinked in surprise. "You actually saw that?" I almost bought it. We both laughed, and for a few minutes I forgot entirely about pretending to be anyone. Across the room, Adrian excused himself from the executives he had been speaking with. His eyes instinctively searched the ballroom until they landed on me. He paused. From where he stood, he could see Noah leaning slightly closer while we laughed together. The smile on Adrian's face disappeared almost instantly. One of the directors continued speaking, but Adrian barely seemed to hear him. His attention remained fixed on the conversation happening near the window. He did not understand why an uncomfortable feeling had settled in his chest. Noah was friendly. Ethan looked happy. Everything was perfectly harmless. So why did it bother him? Before he could answer that question himself, his feet had already started moving. I looked up just as Adrian reached us. "There you are," he said with a calm smile that seemed effortless to everyone except me. "I have been looking for you." Noah turned politely. "We were just talking about Ethan's artwork. He is incredibly talented." Adrian glanced toward me before replying. "I know. There was quiet confidence in those two words that made my heartbeat quicken. He rested a gentle hand against my upper back, guiding me just slightly closer without making the gesture seem possessive. It was subtle enough that no one else would question it, yet close enough for me to notice. The auction is about to begin, Adrian continued. Would you join me? Of course, I answered. Noah smiled warmly. It was great meeting you, Ethan. I hope we talk again soon. Me too. As we walked away, neither of us spoke for several seconds. Finally, I glanced toward Adrian. You did not have to rescue me. He looked genuinely confused. Rescue you? From the conversation. He frowned slightly before answering. I was not rescuing you. Another quiet silence settled between us until he added almost absent-mindedly, I simply preferred being the one standing beside you. The words escaped so naturally that I wondered if he even realized what he had just admitted. Judging by the thoughtful expression that crossed his face a moment later, I was not sure he had. The auction ended with generous applause, and one by one the guests began making their way toward the ballroom's outdoor terrace where dessert and coffee were being served beneath strings of warm white lights. The crisp evening breeze rolling in from Boston Harbor carried away the formal atmosphere that had filled the room only an hour earlier. Conversations became quieter, laughter came more naturally, and people who had spent the evening discussing investments suddenly talked about travel, family, and weekend plans. Adrian and I wandered toward the railing overlooking the water, each holding a cup of coffee. For the first time since arriving, there was no one waiting to greet him or ask for a photograph. We simply stood side by side, watching boats drift across the dark harbor. Thank you, I said quietly. Adrian glanced toward me. For what? For making tonight easier than I expected. He smiled faintly. You made it easier for me. I laughed. I doubt that. You should not. His voice remained calm, almost thoughtful. I usually spend these events counting the minutes until I can leave. Tonight I forgot to check my watch. Before I could answer, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a message from Liam. Did everything survive? I could not help smiling as I replied with a simple thumbs up. Adrian noticed. Your brother. He wants to know whether the city is still standing. Adrian chuckled softly. Tell him we managed. We stayed a little longer until the crowd slowly began to thin. As we walked back toward the parking area, I looked at him and realized something unexpected. The nervous distance I had always felt around Adrian had quietly disappeared. He no longer seemed like the untouchable executive I had watched from afar growing up. He felt like someone surprisingly easy to talk to. The ride back through the city was peaceful. Soft jazz played through the speakers while the skyline reflected across the windshield. We spoke about ordinary things that had nothing to do with the gala. I told him about a professor who insisted every design should tell a story before selling a product. Adrian admitted that his first business presentation had gone so badly he had accidentally skipped half his slides. You? I laughed. The confident Adrian Brooks? He smiled without looking away from the road. Confidence is usually built on embarrassing memories. By the time we reached my apartment building, it was nearly 11:30. The quiet neighborhood looked exactly as it had that morning, yet I felt strangely different stepping out of the vehicle. Adrian walked around to open the passenger door before handing me my garment bag. Thank you again, he said sincerely. You saved my evening. I shook my head. It was only one night. The agreement is complete. The words sounded simple enough, but for reasons I could not explain, saying them left an unexpected heaviness in my chest. Adrian remained standing beside the sidewalk instead of immediately returning to the driver's seat. The silence between us felt comfortable rather than awkward. Finally, I smiled. Well, goodbye. He looked at me for a moment longer than expected before answering. Good night, Ethan. I started walking toward my building entrance when my phone vibrated again. Thinking it was Liam, I unlocked the screen without stopping. Instead, I found a new message from Adrian. "Thank you for reminding me that genuine company is worth more than a perfect image." I smiled to myself before typing back. I had a better time than I expected too. Less than 10 seconds later, 3 small dots appeared as he began replying. Neither of us seemed ready for the conversation to end, even though the reason we had met was already over. The next morning I expected the messages to stop. After all, our arrangement had ended the moment Adrian dropped me off outside my apartment. He had his world, I had mine, and whatever strange connection had appeared during one unforgettable evening would naturally fade away. Instead, my phone lit up at exactly 8:15. "Good luck with your presentation today." I stared at the screen in confusion. I had mentioned my senior design critique only once during the drive home. Somehow, he had remembered. A smile escaped before I could stop it. "Thank you. I hope your board meeting goes well." Less than a minute later another message appeared. "I appreciate that. Let me know how your presentation goes." It became a pattern neither of us acknowledged. One message in the morning. Another sometime in the afternoon. Sometimes a photograph of Boston Harbor outside Adrian's office with a comment about the weather. Sometimes a picture of a coffee I had discovered near campus. The conversations were never forced. They simply continued as though they had been happening for years instead of days. 2 weeks passed before Adrian unexpectedly called one Friday afternoon. "Are you busy this evening?" he asked. "Only with a very exciting assignment about typography." He laughed quietly. "That sounds thrilling." "It is not. Would you like a better offer?" I hesitated for only a second. "What did you have in mind?" "There is a small Italian restaurant in Beacon Hill. No photographers. No investors. No pretending." I found myself agreeing before my cautious side had time to object. Dinner was surprisingly ordinary in the best possible way. We talked about favorite childhood movies, terrible college jobs, and why Adrian secretly preferred bookstores over networking events. He admitted he had not eaten dinner before 9 o'clock in almost 3 years because work had always come first. I confessed that I still carried a sketchbook everywhere even though most of my designs were digital now. After dinner we wandered through quiet streets lined with historic brick buildings until we reached Boston Common. Autumn leaves drifted across the walking paths while musicians performed near the park entrance. There were no expectations, no agreements, and no audience watching us. It felt peaceful. Almost natural. That peaceful feeling lasted until Saturday afternoon when Liam showed up unannounced at my apartment carrying 2 boxes of pizza. He barely sat down before noticing my phone light up on the coffee table. Adrian's name flashed across the screen beside a simple message asking whether I wanted to visit an art exhibit the following weekend. Liam's expression immediately changed. "You are still talking to him?" I looked up carefully. "Yes." "Why?" "Because we became friends." Liam leaned back, folding his arms exactly the way he always did when he was frustrated. "Ethan, Adrian is my best friend. I know him better than anyone." "Then you know he is a good person." "That is not the point." His voice softened, but the concern remained. "His life is completely different from yours. His schedule, his responsibilities, the people around him. I do not want you getting hurt because you mistake kindness for something more." I remained silent, unsure how to answer because I had been asking myself the same question. Liam sighed deeply before standing. "Just promise me one thing." "What?" He looked directly at me. "Do not give your heart to someone who may not even realize he is holding it." After he left, I stared at Adrian's unanswered message for a very long time, wondering whether my brother had seen a danger that I had completely missed. For the first time since that unforgettable evening, I did not answer Adrian's message. My phone remained on the corner of my desk while I forced myself to concentrate on finishing a branding project for my senior portfolio. Every few minutes my eyes drifted toward the screen, wondering whether another notification would appear. It did. "Hope your day is going well." I smiled despite myself, then remembered Liam's words. "Do not give your heart to someone who may not even realize he is holding it." Instead of replying, I locked my phone and returned to my sketches. The silence continued into the next day. Adrian sent another message asking how my presentation had gone. I read it 3 times before placing the phone face down. By Sunday evening there were no new messages. Somehow the quiet felt heavier than any conversation we had shared. Across the city, Adrian leaned back in his office chair, staring at his own unanswered texts. The floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the glowing Boston skyline, but he barely noticed the view. His executive assistant had already gone home, leaving the building almost completely silent. He picked up his phone again, reading through their conversations over the past 2 weeks. None of them felt forced. None of them sounded one-sided. So why had Ethan suddenly disappeared? Adrian considered calling Liam, but stopped himself. If Ethan needed space, asking his brother would only make things more complicated. He set the phone aside and opened a financial report, only to realize 10 minutes later that he had not read a single page. His thoughts kept returning to one image. Ethan laughing beneath the string lights outside the gala. Ethan smiling while talking about watercolor illustrations. Ethan standing beside him in the tailor shop wearing that midnight blue suit. Adrian closed the report with a quiet sigh. Work had always been the simplest part of his life because numbers followed logic. Feelings did not. Meanwhile, I spent the weekend convincing myself that creating distance was the responsible choice. Liam was probably right. Adrian was kind to everyone. Maybe I had mistaken his generosity for something personal. By Monday afternoon I had almost succeeded in believing it until my design professor announced that our final exhibition would open in 3 weeks and invited local business leaders to attend. Without thinking, I imagined Adrian walking through the gallery, stopping in front of my work with that quiet smile that always made me feel unexpectedly confident. The image lingered long after class ended. As I stepped outside, my phone vibrated once more. I expected another message from Adrian. Instead, it was Liam. "Dinner at Mom's tomorrow. 7 o'clock. Do not be late." Family dinners were impossible to avoid, so I agreed. The following evening our parents' house felt as warm and familiar as ever. My mother filled the table with homemade pasta while my father talked about neighborhood baseball scores. Everything seemed perfectly normal until the front doorbell rang. Liam stood up. That must be Adrian. I nearly dropped my fork. A few seconds later Adrian walked into the dining room carrying a pie from the bakery my mother loved. His eyes met mine for the briefest moment. Surprise flashed across both our faces before either of us could hide it. My mother smiled happily, completely unaware of the awkward silence that had settled over the room. "Wonderful," she said. "Now everyone is here." Adrian greeted my parents warmly before pulling out the chair directly across from mine. Throughout dinner we barely exchanged a dozen words, yet every accidental glance seemed to last longer than it should. It became painfully clear that avoiding each other had not made anything easier. If anything, it had only revealed how much both of us had begun to miss the conversations we thought would be simple to leave behind. Dinner ended with homemade apple pie, familiar laughter, and conversations that sounded perfectly ordinary to everyone except Adrian and me. Every time our eyes met across the table, one of us would look away first. My mother eventually noticed the unusual silence and smiled knowingly. "You two were talking so much at the gala," she said while pouring coffee. "Now neither of you can finish a sentence." Liam glanced between us before quickly changing the subject, but the comment lingered in my mind all evening. When everyone began clearing the table, I quietly slipped onto the back porch to enjoy the cool autumn air. The backyard looked exactly as it had throughout my childhood. The old maple tree still stood beside the wooden fence, and the porch swing where Liam and I had spent countless summer evenings gently moved with the breeze. I closed my eyes for a moment, hoping the fresh air would settle the confusion in my thoughts. A few seconds later the screen door opened behind me. "I thought I might find you out here," Adrian said softly. I turned around, surprised but not uncomfortable. He stood with both hands in his coat pockets, giving me enough space to leave if I wanted. Neither of us spoke immediately. Finally, I smiled faintly. "I owe you an apology." He looked genuinely puzzled. "For what?" "Ignoring your messages." Adrian lowered his eyes briefly before meeting mine again. I assumed I had done something wrong. Hearing those words immediately filled me with regret. "You did not." I hesitated before continuing. "I just needed time to think." "About us?" That single question caught me completely off guard. I stared at him, unable to answer right away. Adrian let out a quiet breath. "Liam came to my office last week." My heart sank. "He talked to you?" Adrian nodded slowly. "He did not threaten me or tell me to stay away. He only asked one question." I waited nervously. Adrian's voice became almost reflective. He asked whether I knew the difference between enjoying someone's company and being willing to become part of their life. The backyard fell silent except for the rustling leaves above us. At first, Adrian admitted, I thought the answer was obvious. He smiled to himself. "Then I realized I could not stop thinking about you. Every morning I wondered if you had eaten breakfast. Every evening I wanted to tell you something funny that happened during my day. I kept looking for messages that never arrived. My heartbeat became impossible to ignore." "Adrian." He gently shook his head. "I am not asking you for an answer tonight. I only want you to know something I finally admitted to myself." He looked directly into my eyes, and for the first time since I had known him, the composed executive disappeared completely. Standing before me was simply a man being honest. That evening at the gala began as an arrangement. He smiled softly. Everything afterward was my choice. I felt every wall I had carefully built over the past week quietly fall away. Before I could respond, the back door opened again. Liam stepped onto the porch, stopping immediately when he saw us standing there. His eyes moved from Adrian to me before he sighed with the expression of someone finally understanding a story that had been unfolding in front of him all along. "I was looking for both of you," he said gently. "Looks like I already found the answer instead." For a long moment, none of us spoke. The porch light cast a warm glow across the wooden floorboards while the familiar sounds of crickets filled the quiet backyard. Liam looked at Adrian first, then at me, and slowly shook his head with an amused smile. "You know," he said, "I spent the last week trying to protect my little brother." He paused before letting out a small laugh. "I completely forgot that he is old enough to choose who makes him happy." He stepped closer and rested a hand on my shoulder. "Ethan, I was never against you. I was only afraid that one of the most important people in my life might accidentally hurt the other." Adrian answered before I could. "That will never be something I take lightly." Liam studied him for a few quiet seconds, searching for any sign of uncertainty. Apparently he found none. "Good," he replied. "Because if either of you ever stops communicating, I refuse to spend every family dinner pretending I do not notice." We all laughed, and the tension that had quietly followed us for days finally disappeared. 3 weeks later, the university's senior design exhibition opened downtown. Students nervously stood beside their projects while local business owners, professors, and families wandered through the gallery. I had almost convinced myself Adrian would be too busy to attend. Then, just before the opening remarks began, he walked through the entrance wearing the same calm smile I had first seen on the night everything changed. He was not carrying flowers or making a grand entrance. Instead, he walked directly to my display and spent several minutes studying every illustration without saying a word. When he finally turned toward me, his eyes held the same quiet warmth I had come to recognize. "You told stories before you sold the design," he said. "Your professor was right." Hearing him remember something I had mentioned weeks earlier meant more than any compliment from the judges that afternoon. My project was later announced as the recipient of the exhibition's highest award. While everyone congratulated me, I instinctively searched the crowd until I found Adrian smiling with unmistakable pride. He looked happier about the news than I did. A year passed more quickly than either of us expected. I accepted a position at a creative studio in Boston while continuing to illustrate children's books on weekends. Adrian learned to leave the office before sunset at least once a week, something his employees claimed had never happened before. Friday evenings became our tradition. Sometimes we explored small bookstores. Sometimes we walked through Boston Common with coffee in hand. Sometimes we simply sat together without feeling the need to fill every silence. One afternoon, while organizing old photographs, my mother framed a picture from that charity gala. It captured the exact moment we had stepped into the ballroom together, both of us smiling without realizing the camera had caught us. She placed it on the bookshelf in her living room with a handwritten note beneath the frame that read, "The only thing that was ever pretend was the reason you stood together that night." Every time I visit my parents, I stop for a moment and look at that photograph. It reminds me that life rarely changes because of perfect plans. Sometimes everything begins with one unexpected choice, one ordinary evening, and one person brave enough to say, "Come with me." The rest of the story is built not on pretending to care, but on discovering that the most meaningful relationships often begin long before either heart is ready to admit the truth.